Good day, YouTubers. My name is Jim, and I'm an avid Ontario Northland Rail fan. This is my first video here, so please excuse my amateur production quality. First, to give you a little background, I used to spend my summers when I was a kid in Northern Ontario, only a few blocks from the Ontario Northland main line. So I spent a lot of time train watching and was lucky enough to take the Northlander multiple times. I started collecting HO Ontario Northland model trains quite young. I believe that my collection now captures one of nearly every HO model produced for the Ontario Northland. I know that might sound a little crazy, but until the last 10 years or so, there was actually very little that had been modeled commercially. I found it interesting to research these models and to hunt down the few items that I was missing from my collection, and decided that I wanted to put together a series of videos here to illustrate what models had been made and by whom, with the hope that some others might find it interesting. My first video here is going to be specific to Ontario Northland models made by Cox. All of these were made available in their 1974 or 1975 catalogs. Let's start with the F3A. Now, Ontario Northland did not have any F3As, but they did have FP7As in the 1500 series. So this model is far from being an accurate representation of an Ontario Northland F unit. With that said, I think most kids of the day and those not too hung up on prototypical accuracy were probably just happy to have an Ontario Northland F unit that they could purchase. Your only other choice at this point was to scratch build or modify and paint locomotives yourself. So the paint scheme is a reasonable representation of the original Ontario Northland paint scheme, except that the green used is much too light in color. Now, just a note here that the Ontario Northland did experiment with a lighter shade of green in the late 60s. Some people called this their jade green paint scheme, and this was applied to F Unit 1503. I suggest this color here is not bright enough to represent this unit, but as a kid, that was my imaginative liberty, I guess you could say. Now, to provide a comparison to a more accurately modeled unit and paint scheme, I'd like to compare it here to this relatively recent model made available by Rapido. Let me better display this on the track here. You can see the obvious difference in length between the two models. The actual FP7 was 4 feet longer than the regular F3s and the F7s. You can see the difference in the paint colors and the difference in grill work, as well as many other details, porthole placements and such. It's also a nice comparative example to illustrate how far we've come over the last 45 years, which is approximately the period of time between the manufacture of these two locomotives. Now, just a note here as to why I'm pushing these Cox locomotives around and not letting them run under their own power. Neither of these Cox locomotives run anymore as the result of heavy play and abuse. The F3A here was a model from my childhood, while the GP9 that I'll push into frame now I found down at my local hobby shop. Now, both were converted to dummies long ago, but I'm still happy to have them as a part of my collection. Now, on to this GP9. The Ontario Northland did have 1600 series GP9s, but again, the model here is a fairly significant departure from the Ontario Northland's actual locomotives. The original color scheme is again a reasonable representation, aside from the green color being much too light. The Ontario Northland GP9s did not have chopped noses, and they did not have dynamic brakes. The Ontario Northland did chop the nose on their unit number 1604, but to my knowledge, she emerged from the shop in the later Ontario Northland yellow chevron scheme, so there was never a chop nose GP9 that was in the classic green scheme. To provide another comparison to a more accurate locomotive model, let's compare to a Proto 2000 GP9 here. This model isn't perfect, and it's already about 20 years old, so pretty good detail for a 20-year-old model. But it more accurately represents the general body shape and some of the details, such as the torpedo tube air reservoirs and the lack of the dynamic brakes, and of course the high short hood. Now on to the freight cars. So Cox did offer a 40-foot boxcar in Ontario Northland, as per this yellow car here. Now it seems like Cox were looking to represent the progressive paint scheme, but for some reason decided to model completely different colors. The actual progressive paint scheme was a green car with white lettering and white symbol. Now to provide another comparative example, here is a car that was offered by True Line Trains that much more accurately reflects what the progressive paint scheme would have looked like. So again, white on green. Now finally, the caboose. Now Ontario Northland did not have any center copula cabooses until the 80s, when they acquired a number, but these were acquired in the newer yellow chevron paint scheme. So to my knowledge, they never had a caboose in an earlier paint scheme that was a center copula caboose. With that said, the silver sides and the red ends does reflect how Ontario Northland was painting many of their cabooses. And again, like the other models here, I think it's fun to compare to a later model offering that more accurately reflects cabooses that Ontario Northland had. Again, while not perfect, this True Line Trains Ontario Northland caboose painted in the silver with red ends is a more reasonable representation of what they would have actually run. I know some people really enjoy seeing original packaging. Now I only have this one box here from Cox. I believe this is what the GP9 came in. And it is interesting to see how they were packaging up their cars and locomotives in the day with lots of different marketing material. Expand your railroad layout with Cox HO accessories. Seem to be a lot of military offerings. I think the best way to look at these early model railroad locomotives and cars is to forget about comparing to prototypical equipment and just appreciate the fact that manufacturers were trying to make the most of their molds and production runs by providing paint schemes for other railways. Of course, many of these were far from accurate. As a result, I find it a bit of a novelty to collect. Now these Cox locomotives and cars are becoming a bit harder to find in the used market. You do see the odd one pop up on eBay. They don't seem to demand much of a premium still, but you just need to keep your eyes open to find one. If there is any additional information that any of you out there have, I would love to hear it. To my knowledge, there were no other Cox Ontario Northland models. I had thought that I had seen a green 40-foot Cox boxcar in some pictures many years back, but I'm unsure if that was an actual production run or if that was something done by a modeler. If anyone out there knows and would care to advise me, that would be much appreciated. I hope that you enjoyed my video. I will work to have another up very soon. Ontario Northland HO scale model trains have been made by Atlas, Lionel HO, Concord, Lifelike, Model Power, Pemco, IHC, even Markland, Rocco, Intermountain, Bowser, Rapido, and I hope to showcase all of these items as I have the opportunity to do so. Thanks again.